There are houses in America that are famous because of their architecture. There are houses famous because presidents lived in them. And then there are houses that become famous for something much harder to explain. In the middle of San Diego's historic Old Town stands one of those places, the Whaley House. Built in the 1850s, it became a family home, a theater, a general store, and even a courthouse. But long before the house was completed, the ground beneath it had already witnessed executions. Over the years, tragedy repeatedly returned to the property, and eventually, stories began spreading that the people who died there had never truly left. Today, the Whaley House is a historic museum and one of the places most strongly associated with ghost stories in San Diego. San Diego County Parks 1. To understand why the house became so feared, you have to go back to San Diego in the early 1850s. This was not the modern city people know today. Old Town was a rough frontier community, and crime and violence were part of everyday life. The property where the Whaley House would eventually stand was used as an execution site. A wooden gallows stood on the land, and several men were executed there. Among them was James Robinson, better known as Yankee Jim. His story would become permanently connected to the house. San Diego History Center 2. Yankee Jim had been convicted of grand larceny after being accused of stealing a boat. On the 18th of August, 1852, he was sentenced to death. On September 18, he was taken to the execution site in Old Town. Historical accounts describe a gallows made from heavy wooden beams and a crossbar. Yankee Jim was placed beneath it, a rope was fastened around his neck, and the wagon supporting him was driven away. His accomplices received prison sentences, but Yankee Jim was hanged. His execution happened on the very ground where the Whaley House would later be built, San Diego History Center 2. There is an important detail here. Later, legends transformed Yankee Jim into something much more sinister, with stories claiming he had committed numerous crimes and even murders. Historical sources, however, document his conviction for stealing the boat and his execution for that offense. The legend became much larger than the historical record, and eventually people would claim that Yankee Jim's spirit remained attached to the property, San Diego History Center 2. Then came Thomas Whaley. Whaley was a New York-born businessman who had traveled west during the California Gold Rush and eventually settled in San Diego. He became a successful merchant and also became involved in brickmaking. In 1855, he purchased the property where he planned to build his home and business. The land had an undesirable reputation because of its previous use, but Whaley apparently saw something different, a valuable piece of property in an important part of town. Historical material from the Save Our Heritage organization says he was even present for the earlier executions. San Diego History Center 3. Construction began in 1856, and the building that emerged was unlike most structures in San Diego at the time. Whaley designed the house himself, using bricks produced at his own brickyard. It became one of the earliest and, according to the California State Parks historical record, the first brick buildings in San Diego County. Whaley was immensely proud of it. He reportedly described his new home as the finest and most comfortable place within a huge distance of San Diego. San Diego County Parks 1. From the outside, the completed building looked respectable and almost elegant. Inside, it became the center of the Whaley family's life. Thomas and his wife Anna raised their children there. For a time, it represented prosperity and success, but the family's happiness would not last. One of the first devastating events happened when the Whaley's young son, Thomas Jr., died of scarlet fever. He was only 18 months old. The child died inside the house, and his death became one of the most important pieces of the property's later haunting legend. According to the Whaley House's own historical account, the deaths of members of the family, including Anna and several of the children, became part of the stories surrounding the house. Whaley House 4. But the building wasn't simply a home. It became a place where the public came and went. The Whaley property took on several identities over the decades. A portion of it was used for business, and the building became associated with San Diego's early commercial and civic life. It even served as a theater and later as the county courthouse. California historical records identify the building as having served as the county courthouse for about 20 years. California State Parks 5. Think about what that means. The same walls that heard a family eating dinner also heard courtroom proceedings. The same rooms that once belonged to children later became associated with law and punishment. And outside those walls was the old execution ground where Yankee Jim had died years earlier. Then tragedy struck the Whaley family again. One of the darkest stories connected to the family is that of Violet Whaley, Thomas and Anna's daughter. Violet struggled deeply with her life and eventually died by suicide. Her death became another major part of the house's haunting reputation. The family's history contained not just ordinary deaths from 19th century disease, but profound personal tragedies that left lasting memories inside the home. Those events later became intertwined with reports of paranormal activity. Whaley House 4. And this is where the story changes, because eventually people began claiming that the house didn't feel empty. Visitors and workers reported hearing unexplained sounds. Some described footsteps moving through rooms when nobody appeared to be there. Others claimed they felt watched. Some reported seeing shadowy figures or apparitions. There were also stories involving the sounds of children, which believers connected with the Whaley family's young son who had died inside the house. The Whaley house itself promotes accounts of unexplained experiences, including reports of footsteps, crying, and children's laughter. Whaley House 4. But one ghost became more famous than the others. Yankee Jim. According to the legend, his spirit returned to the property where he had been executed. People have claimed that his presence can sometimes be sensed inside the house. Some stories describe heavy footsteps or the feeling of an unseen person moving through the building. Because the house was constructed directly on the former execution site, the legend seems almost perfectly designed for a haunted house story. But there is a question that should always be asked when telling this story. What is fact and what is legend? The historical evidence establishes that Yankee Jim was executed on the property. It establishes that the Whaley family lived there. It establishes that family members died, including the young Thomas Whaley Jr., and that Violet later died by suicide. It establishes that the building served multiple purposes and became an important part of San Diego history. What it does not establish is that ghosts actually inhabit the house. Those claims come from reported experiences, stories, legends, and paranormal investigations. The Whaley house is widely described as haunted, but a ghost has never been scientifically established as the explanation for the experiences people report there. Even the house's own presentation distinguishes its documented history from the mysterious paranormal stories surrounding it. Whaley House 4. And perhaps that's what makes the Whaley House more interesting than a simple ghost story. Imagine entering the building after sunset. The streets of Old Town outside are quiet. The building is old, but remarkably well preserved. You walk through the same rooms where the Whaley family once lived. You look at the staircase. You enter the courtroom area. You realize that you're not walking through a fictional, haunted attraction constructed to scare tourists. You're walking through a real 19th century building. People actually lived here. A child actually died here. Members of the family experienced devastating losses here. A courtroom operated here. And beneath the history of the building is the darker history of the land itself. At some point, you might hear a floorboard tree,